Anyway, good morning, everyone. My name's Andrew Grant. I'm the head of the political risk department at Clyde Co. And welcome to the latest in our series of talks that we're hosting for Menas. This morning, it's a very opportune moment to welcome Bijan Kajipur to talk about Iran. It's a crossroads, really. This morning the FT were reporting, and it's well known, there's a bit of a dust-up going on between the White House and Congress as to sanctions. We've just had the Geneva nuclear talks, and it will be fascinating to hear from Bijan as to the prognosis for the future, and everyone in the world is watching it. It probably will define, along with Obamacare, President Obama's second term. So it is very opportune. A little bit about Clyde Co. I know a number of you have been here before. We are a truly international firm throughout the world with 35 offices across the globe. And given what we're talking about this morning, we've been in the Middle East for 35 years. We were one of the first law firms to plant a flag in the sand in Dubai when it was a little creek with dhows floating up and down it. And now we are one of the largest law firms, international law firms in the Middle East. And of course, Iran and what is going on in Iran is as important to us as it is to everyone else in all sectors. There are many people from clients here this morning, but this is the political risk team, and hopefully you will have met, or if you would like to meet any of them, they are all in the room. There will be coffee afterwards. Enough from me. I am hoping that the IT works. Bijan?
I think it works.
Good. We had a little bit of glitch this morning. Which, anyway, I'll hand over to Bijan. No, sorry.
A slight intervention from Menas first.
End slideshow. Have we got any IT people? You sure? Because I think the Menas slides are down there. So. Yeah, you sure?
I'll just talk about it. For those of you that don't know Menas, we've also been around since about 1978, but the company works in two parts. One are a series of monthly and weekly publications, one of which is Iran Focus, which I think, Iran Strategic Focus, which Bijan will talk about, and I think copies have been distributed. And the other side of the business is a consultancy work looking at longer-term political economic risk in the Middle East, increasingly in Africa. We also have a company which deals specifically with border research. Bijan has been, somebody said heard on what's coming out on the left that everybody knows Bijan. So, but Bijan has been involved with Menas for a long time. He's a senior associate with Menas, and I think there's really, I can't think of anyone better to talk about Iran, and particularly the new opportunities opening up on Iran. So please, Bijan.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here. And yeah, this is working. This is all very Iranian. It didn't work first, now it works. But basically, Noel talked about Menas as he said, it's more than publications. Most of you know Menas Associates as publications, but there is a growing consultancy side to it, which I hope you will use when you need, especially when you look at the regions Menas is very strong in. Iran's Strategic Focus is actually the oldest monthly publication of Menas Associates. Used to be called Iran Focus, and then we changed it to Iran Strategic Focus. And you have, I think, the latest copy, and you will realize that copy was written before the Geneva deal on the 24th of November. The new one is coming out in a couple of days, I think, or today, actually. So you will have a deeper analysis of the Geneva deal and what's happening. But if I can move to the presentation. I will start with just a few words on the domestic political dynamics in Iran, because it's important to understand what happened that made this deal possible, or just the general political outlook possible. Give you some background on the nuclear negotiations and the agreed plan of actions. It's called the Joint Plan of Actions. Scenarios for sanctions relief, what is the outlook? A little bit about the Iranian market. Obviously, it has changed enormously. A lot of the companies who are here today, they were involved in the market up to 5, 6, 7 years ago. But in those 5, 6, 7 years, a lot has changed, and I want to share some of my sort of strategic points about the changes, and then basically talk about some of the signposts that will emerge. Let's start with the domestic political dynamics. In Iran, in Islamic Republic of Iran, we have always had two schools of thought, at least two schools of thought. These are the two major ones. Obviously, there are nuances between the two. But one which has been dominant over the past decade is the confrontational approach. It basically distrusts the West and believes that the West will never be conciliatory towards the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is always after toppling the Iranian regime. Hence, the strategy should be to stand up to it. This is the exact words they use, to stand up to it and to challenge it and to confront it. And that's the only way Iran would be respected. You saw a clear sort of documentation of that approach in the Ahmadinejad years, not only standing up to the West, but also challenging a lot of issues that the West is interested in, the anti-Holocaust statements, sort of aggressive behavior, rhetoric towards Israel, and so on. The second school of thought is the more conciliatory approach, and now in the new literature, actually in a report that I co-authored with the National Iranian American Council, we are referring to the second school as the positive sum approach. I think this is a better explanation. The first school is a zero-sum approach, so there will have to be a loser in their attitude. Hence, if you don't want to lose, you have to make the other side lose. The second approach, which is now represented by President Rouhani, but also by the former presidents, Rafsanjani and Khatami, is the positive sum approach, which says, no, we do have a potential and option of working with the West, at least reconciling in some areas. And if you say this school hasn't been in place, it is wrong, because they were actually in place in the 90s and early 2000s. And in fact, that very same school produced the 2001 collaboration between Iran and the US in post-Taliban Afghanistan, and also made a very interesting grand bargain offer to the Americans in 2003. So the same people were there, and the reason I mention this is one of the critical questions that people obviously in the West talk about. They say, well, it was the sanctions that brought the Iranian regime to the negotiating table. Well, there were no significant sanctions in 2001 and 2003. So it can't just be the sanctions. It is basically the return of the moderate, the reformist school. And when you look at the faces that actually represent that thought, they are actually the same faces in the early 2000s. Rafsanjani, former president, was the chairman of the Expediency Council and a close confidant of the leader back then and today. President Khatami was the president in the early 2000s, before Ahmadinejad. Right now, he's an important supporter of the new line and of President Rouhani. Rouhani himself is today the president. Back then, he was the secretary of the National Security Council in Iran, very significant position. Mr. Zarif, back then UN ambassador and one of the chief nuclear negotiators, today foreign minister. Mr. Shamkhani, some people forget him, he's also a very, very important figure in the current approach, was defense minister in the Khatami administration, and is now the secretary of the National Security Council. So it is the same team. Basically what has happened in Iran is, because of the sort of pendulum-like movement of the political developments inside the country, the more moderate, the more conciliatory voice, the positive sum school of thought has returned to executive power. This doesn't mean that they dominate the entire political scene, but they have become an important voice in key decisions. And they are basically using the momentum of the election success of President Rouhani to implement some changes in Iran's regional and foreign policy. So why is it significant? One, it is a win-win discourse. This is really important. The Iranian side, when you listen carefully to Mr. Rouhani and Mr. Zarif and others, they do emphasize on a win-win discourse. And that is important because obviously, psychologically, Iran doesn't want to be seen as the loser in the process. And one element that had been missing in the past 8 years of negotiations was a lack of reference to the end game. And the Iranian side were always saying, no, this is only negotiations to prepare the grounds for regime change in Iran. Now there is a clear reference to the end game and how the end game can look and what kind of a Iran we are going to deal with at the end of the process. So let's focus for a few minutes on the Geneva Agreement. There is a lot more detail than what I have here, but obviously in the interest of time, I wanted to then start looking to the future. There were different meetings in Geneva. The last time before the 24th November agreement, they had met once on the 7th and 8th of November. When all the foreign ministers flew to Geneva on the 8th of November, everyone thought the deal is final, but it didn't happen. But then it happened on the 24th of November after 4 days of very intense negotiations. So what happened? What have the two sides agreed upon? One, that there will be no new sanctions, whether from the UN, the US, or the EU, no new sanctions. That's why it's so important that President Obama and Secretary Kerry manage the US Congress, that there are no new sanctions. Any new sanctions law will create a negative dynamics in Iran. Iran not to enrich beyond 5%. Basically, that means Iran is going to discontinue the 20% enrichment, which was one of the sticking points. No new efforts by the US to limit Iran's oil exports. Basically, a commitment that Iran's oil exports can stay at the current level, and I will come back to that. And there would be no sort of attempt to push it lower. Iran, there was obviously one of the demands from the West was to completely stop the construction of Forda and Natanz. And basically Iran has agreed not to enhance the capacities there. But Fordo, which was the site or is still the site for the 20% enrichment, will be sort of reinstalled to enrich 5%. So it's not going to discontinue its operation, it will just discontinue enriching 20%. Arak, which is the heavy water reactor in Iran, will not be expanded. However, there will be building construction, only building construction, no nuclear-related activity. Iran's R&D in nuclear field won't be expanded. You realize it's all about expansion, both on the sanction side, there will be no expansion of new sanctions, and also on the Iranian side, there will be no expansion of new nuclear capacities. There will be also no assessment of new nuclear sites in Iran. Iran is planning 6 other reactors, and all the activities they have in terms of feasibility study and location studies will be basically frozen for now. And the reprocessing of nuclear material, basically production of plutonium from nuclear waste, will also be stopped. So first of all, an agreement to put a lid on activities and on the Iranian side. That's why the Iranians feel they have actually given more than they have received, a discontinuation of the 20% enrichment. So Iran's rollback very quickly, 20% enrichment will be stopped. Half of the current stockpile of 20% enriched uranium will be converted to nuclear fuel. The main purpose of 20% enrichment was to produce fuel for the Tehran research reactor, and the other half will be basically converted back to 3.5% enriched uranium. And Iran will also more or less stop the production of new centrifuges. Only the ones that need to be replaced will be replaced. So Iran's production of centrifuges will be lowered significantly and just include a few centrifuges that need to be changed. There was also agreement that Iran should allow more inspections, especially an inspection to the Arak heavy water reactor, which has already happened. We are waiting for the IAEA reports on that. And just in the past 2 days, there have been negotiations between Iran and the IAEA with regards to implementing these issues. And you realize there is obviously a technical track, which is between the Iranian Atomic Organization, Iranian Nuclear or Atomic Energy Organization, and the IAEA, and there is obviously a sanctions track that needs to be followed. The suspension of sanctions, there has been sort of a commitment to create a clean banking channel for the legitimate business. You know, a lot of the legitimate business, basically sectors that were not part of the actual sanctioned sectors, could also not take place because there were banking sanctions, you know, including pharmaceutical and, you know, the so-called humanitarian group of products. Now, there is a desire to create a clean banking channel for that. And I can tell you that the US government has followed up on this very quickly. And I think this is a very good sign that this channel will be open. Basically, Iran's trade with Western countries will again pick up, even though it's initially in the legitimate categories. Insurance and transportation of oil tankers, the sanctions on these two will be lifted. The EU has already, this is a bit badly formulated from me, the EU has started the process to lift these sanctions. I think they will be lifted in January. Sanctions on petrochemical exports will be lifted. Iran is a petrochemical exporter, and over the next 6 months, this could add up, if we take the previous performance of the petrochemical sector, to about $6 billion of additional income, or not so easily materialized before in terms of upside for Iran. Iran is now allowed to purchase gold and precious metals and all related services, banking, insurance, and so on. This is important because it could become a vehicle for selling Iranian exports, whether it's oil and others. So Iranian exports for gold or silver and so on. And those who know Iran know that there is always a use for gold in Iran. They produce a lot of gold coins for the local market. Suspension of sanctions on Iran's automotive industry. This is the fastest sector actually to react. They already held an international conference in Iran, and a lot of the big players have already returned. Renault, Peugeot, and others have come back to sort of reconnect to the market and to their partners in Iran. Just one interesting fact for those who follow Iran. In fact, Renault sold more cars in Iran in 2011 and 2012 than they sold in France. And so it's just the potential of the market is there, and obviously these companies are keen to go back. Provision of services to Iran's aviation industry. You know, we have a very aged aviation industry, and even though there are selected companies that will be relieved from sanctions, but it will open up some opportunities. Return of Iran's funds for oil exports. There is a lot more nuance to this. It's not an easy return. There is an agreement to allow Iran to return $700 million a month over the next 6 months. That's why some have sort of talked about $4.2 billion in the next 6 months. But this is sort of a new flow of frozen funds, and the rest of the Iranian export revenues, like it has already been done in China and India, will be used for imports. So as I said, there is a lot more detail, and it's more or less public. So those of you who are interested can either get the next Iran strategic focus or try to find other analyses. Now, there is a clear statement here that this is only an interim agreement. The agreement is to basically build confidence and move forward and negotiate. And basically, the agreement is to negotiate in the next 6 to 12 months. It can be extended to 12 months to work towards an end game agreement. And the key objectives for that in that end game is that Iran's nuclear program will have to be subject to extensive inspection and verification. Basically, Iran has to come clean in terms of that there is no sort of military component to its nuclear program. And that will also include the ratification of the additional protocol, which means that Iran or the Iranian nuclear program will be subject to a lot of snap inspections. Iran will also respond to the concerns regarding Iraq heavy water reactor. It's important to understand that Iraq, as long as it does not start producing plutonium, can be looked upon as a separate entity to the nuclear program if you sort of go to the letter of the law. So that's why it's mentioned separately. Obviously, Iran's expectation is that in the end game, all sanctions we will lift it. Iran's enrichment will be basically capped at 5%. And also from Iran's perspective, very important, there will be actual cooperation between Iran and international powers on nuclear issues. So some other aspects. Clearly, this is the suboptimal option for both sides. I mean, obviously, both of them expected to achieve more in these negotiations. For example, Iranian hardliners believe that Iran has given up too much and has received too little in return. And obviously, there are people on the Western side who believe that there would have been more out of this process. But it is clear that this was an important step, and both sides need to not only build confidence, but also to implement the agreement to maintain the momentum. And from what I can see, both sides are seriously implementing this. I mean, Iran's meetings with the IAEA are important, and they will meet again in Tehran in January, and there will be hopefully a practical steps taken in the process. The Iranian side, like the US side, has had a tough time selling this agreement domestically. Foreign Minister Zarif, since being back from Geneva, has been really doing a very intense stakeholder relations strategy. He went on Iranian TV almost immediately after returning from Geneva. He had a long and challenging session with the Iranian parliament, Majlis, to explain the agreement. He went to Qom to visit the Grand Ayatollahs, the religious leaders of the country, engaged even students and sort of got into debates with them, and has been meeting a lot of regional powers. You know, the Turkish foreign minister and the UAE foreign minister were in Tehran, the Iraqi prime minister, the Afghan president, all in the past 2 weeks. Zarif has traveled to the UAE, to Doha, to Kuwait, and so on. It's important to understand that there is a need to sell this. And we know that the same, you get more coverage from how President Obama or Secretary Kerry have been trying to sell the deal on the US side. I've picked some of the quotes from President Obama's interview on the 7th of December, because they are important. First of all, the reference, for the first time, we have halted advances in the Iranian nuclear program. This is obviously something that the West has been trying to achieve through sanctions, and it's important that it's now happening. Iran is, in fact, rolling back. And the reference by President Obama, we have also said that they have got to roll back their 20% advanced enrichment to zero. This is basically the compensation for the original demand that Iran should stop enrichment, period. Now the reference is Iran will roll back its 20% enrichment to zero. The 5% enrichment will remain. And obviously this is also one of the issues that there was some discomfort in Tehran, because Western politicians started saying we have not given Iran, or we have not accepted Iran's right to enrich uranium, which is understandable from the Western point of view. But Iran is saying, if you, in an agreement, say Iran can continue enrichment up to 5%, that means you have accepted that Iran is enriching uranium to 5%. But these are some of the difficulties in taking this matter forward. The last comment that I've included here is something that would have been nicer if US presidents before President Obama would have realized this. The idea that Iran, given everything we know about their history, would just continue to get more and more nervous about more sanctions and military threats and ultimately just say, okay, we give in, I think does not reflect an honest understanding of the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. And I think this is, at last, after 10 years, some powerful insight in Western capitals. So what are the threats? There is a deal. Both sides have signed it. Both sides are serious about implementing it. The very first threat to it or problem with it is the mistrust, the very deep mistrust still on both sides. Both sides believe the other side is not 100% genuine. Some say Iran is just buying time. Others say the US has still not sort of forgotten about its desire to get rid of the Iranian regime. So there is still a lot of distrust. The other main threat, which was close to happening, is that the US Congress passing a new sanctions law on Iran. And that obviously would empower the hardliners in Iran, who will then say, okay, we told you we shouldn't trust the Americans, forget about the deal. Failure on the Iranian side to implement the changes. If there is an IAEA report 3 months down the line saying, no, Iran is still continuing 20% enrichment, or Iran has failed to stop the production of centrifuges, then it will create a major problem for the deal. There is always an element of spoilers. I call them spoilers on all sides. Hardliners in Iran, hardliners in the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, you name it. You know, there are a lot of potential spoilers who are not happy about this deal, and they will probably use their power to undermine the process. In Iran, that can translate into an abnormal activity of human rights abuses, including executions and so on, which is already happening. So the hardline element in the judiciary, which doesn't like the deal, will try to create a negative image and create tensions with the West. And we will have to see how those elements will be contained. Also, an unexpected regional event, an Israeli attack on Lebanon, or Israeli military engagement in Syria, something that would again put the two sides on opposite fronts, which would then create tension and basically undermine the confidence building process. So if all goes well, what is the outlook? Obviously, the sanctions that have been mentioned clearly in the Geneva Agreement will be lifted. Starting in January, there will be the lifting of those sanctions from the EU and the US side. If there is an agreement, this is part of the text as well, if there is an agreement about the end game, which I think is realistically 12 months away, not 6 months, 12 months away, and I will show you a timeline towards the end of this, then the UN sanctions are the first to go. UN sanctions, and there is a small complication in the UN sanctions as well, because the UN resolutions call for the suspension of Iran's enrichment activities. And I talked to a number of UN diplomats, and they said the only way to undo that is basically to undo the old resolution without Iran suspending its enrichment activity will be to pass a new resolution. So there would have to be a new UN Security Council resolution. But this is part of the agreement. If they agree on the next major agreement at the end game, then UN sanctions would be the first to go. If the UN sanctions are lifted come 2015, then a lot of the countries who introduced sanctions based on UN sanctions, because the very last UN resolution on Iran asked third countries or UN members to introduce their own sanctions, and a number of them did, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and so on. So some of those sanctions could be lifted. I believe the Western governments will try to delay the lifting of the key sanctions, the oil embargo and banking sanctions, towards the end of the process, to basically keep the pressure on Tehran in terms of implementing all the agreed steps. Especially, for example, where there could be a hiccup in Iran is the government agreeing to sign the additional protocol or even to implement the additional protocol, but the Iranian parliament not ratifying it. That will become one of the hiccups on the Iranian side. So the Western governments will try to delay the final lifting of the sanctions towards the end of the process. A number of the US sanctions are congressional laws, and those laws can only be lifted through congressional processes, but there is a waiver power that President Obama has. So some of them may actually be initially lifted through waivers, but then eventually lifted depending on the composition of the next Congress and so on in the process of months or years to follow. EU sanctions could be lifted more feasibly, even though there is a process on the EU side as well. It has to go through the legislative process, but it's more feasible, especially if the EU3 agree on the decision, then they will go. What's the outlook for a final deal? In my analysis, in the current constellation of power, Iran is more likely than not to actually sign the final deal, basically to agree to roll back the nuclear program and to basically benefit from the deal. It's more difficult to assess the dynamics in Western capitals, especially because of the US Congress. That's why you will see that in my timeline. I think a final deal is more feasible, practical after the US congressional elections in 2014. That's why I say it will be 12 months and not 6 months. So that the US will basically start a new election cycle again soon, and that election cycle will produce enough tension points for these negotiations. I do believe there is a serious potential for a step-by-step lifting of sanctions within the next 2 years. The Iranian side talks about 6 months and then a year, but I think 2 years and maybe even longer, and in a step-by-step process. And it will obviously, again, depend on so many other issues: internal politics in the US, internal politics in Iran, election cycles, regional issues, and so on. But interestingly, a number of European companies have already started re-engaging Iran. Minister Zangane, Iran's oil minister Zangane, was in Vienna last week, and he met a number of CEOs of international oil and gas companies, and that shows a certain interest. And I mentioned the automotive companies that have come to Tehran as well. Let's just quickly focus on the market and what has happened in the market. First of all, the Iranian GDP, when you look at the purchasing power parity figures, has declined enormously over the past 2 years. This is the GDP per capita in purchasing power parity. And you can see basically Iran benefited from the high oil prices between 2008 and 2010, 2011. But then the impact of sanctions has basically brought Iran's per capita PPP GDP back to the levels of 2004, 2003. So the overall GDP and the purchasing power has declined. When we look at the oil sector, we know that Iran's production has declined. In fact, yesterday there was an OPEC report that said Iran is now the 6th producer in OPEC. Iran used to be the 2nd producer in OPEC up to 2 years ago. The production capacity is now 3.3 million barrels per day, but essentially because they don't have storage anymore, they do not produce as much. The OPEC figure was 2.7 million, but the actual capacity is 3.3 million, and if they produce all of it, considering that they have 1.8 million barrel per day of domestic consumption in Iranian refineries, the oil export potential is 1.5 million barrels per day. And interestingly, in the new Iranian budget bill that went to parliament a few days ago, this is exactly what is forecast. So in the new year, starting in March, Iran will export 1.5 million barrels per day of oil. The gas side, right now, the snapshot right now, Iran is just a marginal exporter. But what you don't see here is the potential for export of condensates. Iran has a growing potential of export of condensate, and that will also make a difference in some of the calculations. But the interesting thing is when you project everything into 2016, and this is all based on projects currently at hand and the potential currently at hand, the oil story is not very important in terms of production. Iran will at best return to the production capacity of 2 years ago of about 4 million barrels per day. But what will happen, and this has been a response to the sanctions of the past few years, is that Iran will actually have a lot more domestic refining capacity. As you can see, 1 million barrels per day of new domestic refining capacity, which will obviously introduce more and more petroleum products for export. So Iran in 2016 will become a more significant exporter of petroleum products rather than crude. And that's important to understand. But the gas story is much more dramatic. Iran's, again, based on projects at hand and based on a plan to finish those projects by 2015, not 2006. I've added a year to be on the safe side. Iran's gas production is going to grow enormously, and Iran will have a major potential to export energy. I say energy because it won't always be gas. It will be a lot of, for example, there is a lot of electricity export from Iran right now, and that additional gas will empower petrochemicals, electricity exports, and gas-based industry. So there is, something in the pipeline already, but obviously if sanctions are lifted and the potential is increased, there will be need for growth. So if we look at exactly these facts, Iran, by the time some of your companies re-engage Iran, you can say that Iran has actually gone from being an exporter of crude to now being an exporter of crude, gas, but also petroleum products. And that there is a lot of demand for petroleum products in our region, and Iran is going to benefit from that. The economic impact of this development is fully overshadowed by sanctions and subsidy reforms, and also the consequences of the mismanagement that Iran experienced under Ahmadinejad. On a positive note, the subsidy reforms have increased awareness about energy efficiency. There is a lot more talk about energy efficiency, how Iran can improve its energy consumption patterns, how it can generate energy from other sources and so on, not just nuclear, also a lot of renewable energy and so on. I think the growing potential of the gas sector, but also the growing emphasis on value-added activities, refining, petrochemicals, and so on, will basically transform the Iranian petroleum sector. So those of you looking at the petroleum sector going back will face a completely new scene. It's not just we need your help in exploration and development. There will also be a lot of downstream activities and potentials. And there is still, even after the sanctions are lifted, also in the process, a lot of potential for what I call triangle projects, triangle scenarios. For example, right now, Iran and Oman have agreed that Iranian gas will go to Oman and will be converted to LNG in an existing plant. So companies could connect to that, connect and buy the LNG from Oman using Iranian gas without dealing with Iran directly. So there is potential for these types of projects. I just wanted to show you what's happening in terms of gas pipelines in Iran. It's an amazing story, both domestic but also connectivity to the region. There is now, I think, if I'm not wrong, 35,000 kilometers of pipelines, gas pipelines in place in Iran. And And we obviously have a lot of export routes already existing to Turkey. There is an interconnectivity with Armenia and also Azerbaijan. Obviously, we import from Turkmenistan. There is a pipeline that has been laid to go to Pakistan, waiting for the construction of the Pakistani end, and also a potential for exports to Iraq and beyond. And in fact, the Iranian Deputy Minister of Petroleum was on the record saying the gas exports to Iraq will start in the summer of 2014, which is very feasible. I mean, the gas will be available, and Iranians are already building the pipelines very efficiently. So again, looking at opportunities, pipeline sector is a major sector for Iran. Some other strategic considerations when you look to re-engage the market. Sorry. What we can call corporate Iran has changed enormously in these 8 years if you have been away from the market for 7-8 years. 8 years ago, we still had a major domination by the state sector, and most of the companies, especially foreign companies and oil companies, would deal with were state-owned companies. Today, there is a clear shift towards what we call semi-state companies. Military organizations, revolutionary foundations, religious foundations, owning companies. And this is a completely different attitude and approach to business. They are, a younger generation of revolutionary figures who have gone through the Iran-Iraq war. Their worldview is very different, and as I said, their business approaches are very different. So it's important to understand the sort of transformation that what I call corporate Iran has gone through. The new government is trying to improve business climate, and it's very interesting to note that the president of the Iran Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Nahavandian, is now the chief of staff, and essentially he's the number 3 in the government. The only reason he did not become a minister was that he actually has a US green card. So the Iranian parliament would have not approved him. So it was easier to make him chief of staff where you don't need a vote of confidence from the parliament. But he's very powerful, and he represents the private sector, the business, and he's pushing for a lot of changes, especially legal changes and structural changes, to make Iran a much more investor-friendly, private sector-friendly country. Obviously, it's a process, but it's started. The overall investment regime has improved. It started to improve even before the new government came in, but obviously political risk and also some operational bottlenecks remain as the main risk. So it's important, depending on what sector you're looking at, to actually analyze what the problems and risks are. And the Iranian companies in general have become both state-owned, semi-state-owned, but also private, have become much more capable and much more export-oriented. Obviously, years of sanctions compelled the Iranian government to pass on their projects to Iranian companies, and sometimes also through trial and error they have become more capable. What's the outlook for the market development? In my view, the pendulum has swung back, both politically. I showed you it has gone from the confrontational approach to the more conciliatory approach, but also business-wise, it has moved towards more liberal economic policies. However, the economic crisis that Iran is in is so deep that it's going to take a few years, probably Rouhani's first term, to bring Iran back to a certain degree of normalcy, and that's why foreign investment and foreign technology will be actually needed. All obviously depending on the success of the nuclear negotiations. So if they collapse and more sanctions are imposed on Iran, we would have to reevaluate the situation. This is now based on what I think will emerge out of these negotiations. The government policy is focused on export-led growth, more and more empowering Iranian companies to export, but that again will require partnerships and collaboration with international companies for investment and technology. So how do you position yourselves for future business? Obviously, there will be opportunities if these negotiations go well. I think you have to start re-engaging the market sooner rather than later. Obviously, I know I'm based in Vienna, and between Vienna and London, I see the companies are becoming more active. They're starting to look at Iran. They want to engage the market. And one way is for those who can, to start engaging in sectors that are not sanctioned. Obviously, there are areas that are exempt from sanctions. The sector, I mean, as I said, the overall composition of corporate Iran has changed. And it would be a big mistake if you say, oh, we used to work there 10 years ago, and now we want to go back to the same partner. It would be a big mistake. I urge you to assess the market, assess who the stakeholders are, especially assess whether any of these semi-state organizations have started dominating the sector you were in, and how they are positioned, especially how they are positioned also with regards to the blacklisted companies. Because don't forget, even if most of the sanctions will be lifted, this whole issue of Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Iranian military developments, and so on won't disappear. So there will still be a blacklist of companies that are affiliated with the Revolutionary Guards, companies that are affiliated with the Iranian missile program, and so on. So it's important to analyze and do due diligence. And it's also important to understand your stakeholders and engage them. Talking about stakeholder relations, I just wanted to share with you, because I mentioned Iran strategic focus, one of the services you get if you subscribe to Iran Energy Focus, Iran strategic focus, is that you get updated organizational charts of all the companies that are active in the oil and gas sector, including some of these new stakeholders that I mentioned. So you will always have an update, and you will always see through the red names who has changed in the past month if you are a regular subscriber reader. So it's important. If you want to look at engaging the Iranian oil sector, oil and gas sector, this would be a very, very useful tool. And there's a lot of data and information there. And also you get an update on actual projects that are actually happening. Who are the contractors? What's the progress of the project? What has happened? And this will allow you to assess, one, the capabilities of the companies, but also to assess the project, whether it's of interest to you. So I want to gradually close, first of all, a timeline. I didn't manage to make it more sort of interesting in terms of structure, but essentially, I think the process of lifting the selected sanctions I mentioned will start in January. As I said, the EU has already started the process and so on, and also the US government, from what I understand, has started thinking about ways of how to implement it. Parallel to those lifting of sanctions, Iran will start implementing its technical commitments, and sometime in March, April, I think we can expect a report from the IAEA reporting on how Iran has actually implemented the technical demands. And depending on that report, it will generate momentum for the next phase of negotiations, which I think will start in the new year. I believe, my prediction is that a new deal will be signed after the US congressional elections in November of 2014, simply because the election cycle will be just too difficult, both for the US government to sell a new deal, but also for the Iranian side to digest some of the comments that can be expected from the congressional candidates. So I think this reference to allowing the 6 months to be extended to 12 months was a very intelligent move to pass it beyond the congressional elections. But so signing, I expected November, December 2014. And then if that happens, if my prediction is correct, January 2015, if the contract, the agreement is exactly what I think will happen. UN sanctions will be lifted, and then Iran will start rolling back other elements of its nuclear program, and then US and EU sanctions could be lifted in 2015, 2016. So it's not going to be a quick process, but it is a process where I think the engagement could start now, and then you could start looking for signposts. If there are new US sanctions on Iran in the next few months, which so far it looks as if the government has managed to, the US government has managed to stop it, it will fully undermine this process and this prediction. If there is a hardline backlash inside Iran, which I think is less likely, it was as a nuance, the commander of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran gave a speech 2 days ago. Obviously, his view is, as I said, that Iran gave too much and got too little. So he said, we don't like the deal, Iran gave too much and got too little. And suddenly he remembered that Supreme Leader had actually endorsed this deal. So he said, no, but the red lines have not been crossed as yet. So the hardliners have a difficult time accepting it, but they are accepting it. But they will put their pressure where they can. And obviously a new regional crisis. These would be signposts, and obviously positive signposts is if the IAEA produces a positive result, and the meetings in Vienna in the past 2 days have been positive, if they go well and Iran starts dismantling some parts, then that would mean that it's going in the right direction. So I'm concluding now. I believe there is a good chance for a comprehensive deal in 2014. Political constellations in Tehran and Washington, I think it's important also what we have in Washington, and also some of the regional uncertainties. These are all helping actually make this deal possible. There are still many threats, but I believe interested companies should engage the market sooner rather than later. And don't forget, the market has changed over these years. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think up to 10 we can about 10 minutes. Yeah. Any questions? We have about 10, 15 minutes for questions. Please.
I'd like to ask a question. You mentioned that some of the sanctions might ease progressively, but said that the financial sanctions would be left to last. Clearly, in terms of trade, the banks are very key because if you can't get paid, the trade doesn't happen. Can you comment on that?
Sure. I mean, it's obviously exactly because of that issue, the banking sanctions are the most important element that Iran wants lifted. But the strategy from the Western capitals will be to delay the lifting of those sanctions as far as possible so that the Iranians are compelled to act faster. For example, ratifying the additional protocol, maybe dismantling some of the installations that they have in different sites. So it's obviously all the question of how the negotiators manage to find the final compromise. You can also see in the current interim agreement that there is talk about creating clean banking channels. So it may be an interim process that they say, well, in the meantime, legitimate trade in all the areas where sanctions are lifted will go through these clean banks, but it will not be a blanket lifting of financial sanctions. It's all a question of negotiating and implementation tactics, in my view. So there will be a step-by-step, and Iran will also maintain the main issues towards the end to compel the other side to implement what they have committed to. So all I'm trying to say is it's going to be a process, it's going to be a step-by-step process, and it's not going to be that easy in the implementation phase.
William Sandover, British Airways. If the Iranians are genuinely negotiating, they have performed the most massive strategic U-turn of a policy that has been in existence through many swings of the pendulum under both Ayatollahs. One can understand why the Israelis and others are sceptical that this massive massive strategic U-turn has actually taken place. Do you think it has, or do you think the Iranians have got what they want in nuclear technology terms and can now take their foot off the pedal?
I think, first of all, Iranians are probably good in massive strategic U-turns, because also they produced that in 1988 with ending the Iran-Iraq war and accepting the UN resolution 1 year after it was passed by the UN. So basically what there is definitely a sort of calculus, strategic calculus in Iran. And I wouldn't say it's the sort of most significant strategic U-turn. As I said, this was Iranian strategy 12, 13 years ago. I think the real U-turn happened on the Western side when they started realizing that you can't just continue putting pressure on Iran and expecting that Iran will break. I think there have been obviously adjustments on both sides, but what was the most important element in Iran was the election result, was the election of Hassan Rouhani. It could have gone any other way. It could have been Mr. Ghalibaf, the mayor of Tehran, and the dynamics would have been very different. So elections and sort of political dynamics play an important role as well.
Thank you very much, Bijan, for your very good lecture. My question is regarding the Geneva Agreement. It seems that it's more of a political issue rather than a business language, because it shows that both parties are interested to come into an agreement in the long term. In this agreement, it says it suspends the sanctions and lifts the sanctions for certain types of products like petroleum, oil, precious metals. And in the footnote, it says related services can include transportation, insurance, and banking system, and so on. So what would be the effect for these services in these 6 months? For example, it says Iran Air can be insured. However, can Lloyd's or London Market can insure it? Can the financial institutions in Europe deal with Iranian banks for those certain types of goods?
I think first of all, there is a lot of ambiguity and the need to clarify some of these things. But the reality is, from a business perspective, as long as you're just looking at the next 6 months, no one is going to commit to a long-term strategy, because it can also collapse. The deal can also collapse. So I don't think it was thought as compelling businesses to actually start signing agreements now, but it was meant as a way of making feasible what's already happening, because a lot is already happening. I mean, the European Union, with all this, the problems, still has, I think the latest figure is something like 15 billion euro of trade with Iran a year. I mean, so there is trade, there is activity, but to make it more feasible, what's already happening, Iran Air is already flying to European capitals. How do we make that what is already happening, what's already legitimate, more feasible until a new deal is signed? So I don't think it's meant to make any of you to go and sign contracts, but to look at the potential of opening of the market, because if the final deal is signed a year from now and sanctions are lifted within the next 2 years, then obviously it becomes much more feasible to do long-term business.
Regardless of what people voted for in the election, certainly when I was dealing with Iran, I never heard of a Tehran taxi driver, no friend of the conservatives in the regime, who did not think Iran should have a bomb. So my question is, what do people really think of this? The Bazari dealers as well, they would be pretty much unanimously in favour of the bomb as well, I think. Is there any danger that the people of Iran are going to reject this somehow?
It's the first time I hear it, that someone heard from a taxi driver that he wants a bomb, but I take it as it is. But what the Iranians want is, it's actually referred to in a lot of speeches by politicians in Iran. They say, we want Iran to have its deserved place in the world community. So how do you get your deserved place in the world community? How do you get respected? One way is to qualify for the World Cup and things like that, which Iran does here and there. But obviously, to be reintegrated in world trade and become really materialize the potential of the Iranian economy is much more important. And I think you just mentioned the Bazaris. The Bazaris understand that. The Bazaris know. Even some of the revolutionary guards turned businessmen understand that with the current sanctions regime, you cannot really integrate fully in world trade, and you materialize the Iranian potential. So I don't see the threat of the Iranian people turning against. There will always be hardliners who are unhappy about the apparent improvement of ties with Western countries. This is a different matter. It's not, undermining what's happening on the nuclear or sanction side. Is this feeling that, Iran is becoming a friend of the West again. There are always hardliners. There will always be hardliners who are opposed to that. But the overwhelming majority, they want a different Iran, and that's part of the pendulum swinging back, because they voted, 52% voted for Rouhani with that kind of a discourse. We need to have a different Iran.
Thank you very much. You concentrated on Iran, clearly domestically. I wonder if you can give us any insight how you think this will impact Iran's allies, whether it be within Syria, Hezbollah, other groups with which there is a strong
Iran's regional strategy has always been one of, you can call it, strategic competition with the other powers in the region. So with Israel, with Turkey in a way, and with Saudi Arabia. Iran is still positioned like that. Iran wants to be, there is a 20-year program, the 20-year vision in Iran, which says Iran should be the #1 technological and economic power of the region by 2025. That strategy won't change. Iran will try to strategically compete with these powers I just mentioned, but the emphasis is on technological and economic development. Those countries we can describe as Iran's allies, Syria or Lebanon or Hezbollah, proxies and so on, are part of this strategy, part of this sort of positioning Iran regionally. And within that, it depends a lot on what the other players will do. I mean, if Saudi Arabia will continue to antagonize Iran and antagonize the deal and so on, Iran will also respond and so on. If Israel continues to antagonize Iran, Iran will respond through its proxies. Very interesting, in the same speech by the commander of the Revolutionary Guards, he made an interesting reference to Syria. He said, Iran will do whatever it's in its power to maintain the regime in Syria. He didn't say maintain Assad in Syria. So this seems to be, for example, the new line in Syria. We want to maintain the regime, and I think these strategies and policies won't change.
Well, if there are no more questions, and Bijan will be here for a little while, and congressionals will be here. If you haven't got your copy of Iran's strategic focus, there is one available from one of the Menas people here. But can I just ask you to join me and say thank you very much.
Thank you.